Grace Daniels had always believed that no matter how dark life became, God could still change a person's story. Even as a child, she held tightly to faith because it was the only thing she truly possessed. After losing both parents at a young age, Grace was forced to live with her aunt, Auntie Rose, and her cousin, Vanessa. Life inside their home was painful. Grace was treated more like a servant than the family members. She cleaned the house, cooked meals, washed clothes, and endured endless insults. Vanessa enjoyed humiliating her. She constantly mocked Grace's cheap clothes, old shoes, and quiet personality. Whenever Grace spoke about faith or prayer, Vanessa laughed and called her foolish. But Grace remained patient. Every morning before sunrise, she knelt beside her small bed to pray. She prayed for strength, for peace, and for a better future. After praying, she would quietly leave for work at a small company where she worked as a receptionist. The salary was barely enough, but Grace managed to survive carefully. She often skipped meals so she could save money for transportation and basic needs. Despite everything, she still found reasons to smile. One afternoon, while working at the reception desk, Grace noticed unusual tension around the office. Workers whispered nervously, while managers moved from office to office carrying files. Minutes later, Grace was called into the manager's office. The manager avoided eye contact as he explained that the company was reducing workers because of financial problems. Unfortunately, Grace's name was among those being dismissed. The words felt unreal. Grace begged quietly for another chance, explaining that she had nobody to support her, but the decision had already been finalized. Heartbroken, she packed her few belongings into a small bag and slowly walked out of the building. Outside, dark clouds filled the sky. Heavy rain suddenly began pouring down. People rushed for shelter,
I
but
can't
Grace
believe this
remained
is
standing in
happening.
the rain, holding the
Why
envelope
now? Why
containing her
me?
final payment. When
I
she
have to
opened
keep
it,
going.
her heart sank. The amount was painfully small. Fear immediately overwhelmed her. She had no savings, no family support, no backup plan. As she slowly walked home under the rain, painful thoughts filled her mind. For the first time in years, she felt abandoned completely. By the time she reached home, her clothes were soaked. Vanessa noticed her expression immediately and burst into laughter. She sarcastically asked whether Grace had finally lost her precious little job. When Grace remained silent, Vanessa mocked her even more, saying that prayer and church activities had finally failed her. Grace quietly walked towards the kitchen, hoping to find food, but the pots were empty. Before she could rest, Auntie Rose confronted her angrily about unpaid electricity bills and household expenses. When Grace explained that she had lost her job, her aunt became furious. Instead of showing sympathy, she accused Grace of becoming a burden. That night, Grace locked herself inside her tiny room. The room felt hotter and smaller than ever before. She stared at the cracked walls while tears rolled silently down her cheeks. She checked her account balance and realized she had almost nothing left. For several hours, she cried quietly. Questions tormented her heart. Why did life keep getting worse? Why did every opportunity disappear? Why did it feel like heaven was silent no matter how much she prayed? As thunders echoed outside, Grace remembered the sermon preached by Pastor Elijah several months earlier. He had spoken about faith during difficult seasons and warned people never to give up during moments of pain. Those words returned strongly to her mind. Slowly, Grace moved beside her bed and knelt down. This prayer was different from every other prayer she had prayed before. Her voice trembled as she cried deeply before God. She poured out all her frustration, fear, disappointment, and pain. She begged God not to forget her. She asked Him to change her story because she had reached the limit of her strength. The emotional prayer continued for a long time. Outside the house, rain poured heavily while lightning flashed across the dark sky. Unknown to Grace, a black luxury car suddenly stopped near the building. Inside sat an elderly woman dressed elegantly. She had been returning from an important meeting when her attention strangely shifted towards Grace's house. She stared silently at the small window, glowing faintly in the darkness. The driver eventually asked if they should continue the journey, but the woman kept staring thoughtfully before quietly saying there was something unusual about the atmosphere surrounding the house. Meanwhile, exhausted from crying and praying, Grace eventually fell asleep on the floor beside her bed. The next morning, Grace woke up weak and emotionally drained. The house was unusually noisy because Vanessa was preparing for a party with wealthy friends. While everyone moved around happily, Grace quietly left the house to search for job opportunities. For hours, she walked from one office to another, submitting applications and hearing the same painful response repeatedly. No vacancy. By afternoon, hunger and exhaustion overwhelmed her. She sat quietly near a roadside market trying to rest. That was when she noticed an elderly woman struggling with several heavy bags, while people ignored her completely. Although Grace herself was tired and hungry, she immediately stood up and rushed to help the woman. The elderly woman smiled warmly as Grace carried the bags for her. As they walked together, the woman asked questions about Grace's life. Grace answered respectfully and honestly without complaining or asking for pity. The woman became deeply impressed by her humility. Before leaving, the elderly woman handed Grace a business card and instructed her to visit the address written on it the following morning. Grace looked at the card with confusion. The address belonged to one of the largest companies in the region. That night, Grace could barely sleep. She kept wondering why such an important woman would suddenly help her. The next morning, Grace borrowed decent clothes from a neighbor and nervously visited the company building. The moment she arrived, security guards welcomed her respectfully and escorted her upstairs. Grace was shocked by the luxurious environment around her. Moment later, the elderly woman entered the office smiling warmly. Grace immediately recognized her. The woman revealed that she was the founder and owner of the company. She explained that she had spent years searching for trustworthy and compassionate people to assist her in managing parts of her organization. She confessed that many educated people had disappointed her because they lacked honesty and kindness. But after observing Grace's behavior in the marketplace, she sensed something rare in her spirit. Grace became emotional immediately. The elderly woman then offered her a well-paying managerial position along with accommodation and transportation support. Grace could hardly believe what she was hearing. Tears filled her eyes as she accepted the offer gratefully. Within months, Grace's entire life transformed. She moved into a beautiful apartment, regained her confidence, and quickly became respected within the company because of her intelligence, humility, and honesty. Employees admired her kindness, while clients respected her professionalism. Meanwhile, Vanessa became jealous after hearing about Grace's success. The same people who once mocked her suddenly began speaking kindly to her. Auntie Rose even attempted apologizing for her past behavior, but Grace refused to hold bitterness in her heart. Instead of seeking revenge, she chose forgiveness. She began helping struggling families, paying school fees for children, supporting widows, and donating food to the poor. Many people were shocked that success had not changed her character. One evening, during a church gathering, Grace was invited to share her testimony before a large audience. As she stood before the congregation, memories of her painful past flooded her mind. She remembered the insults, rejection, hunger, loneliness, and tears. Then she remembered the night she knelt beside her bed, believing she had reached the end of her life. Tears rolled gently down her face as she smiled. She explained that sometimes people think God is silent because answers do not come immediately. But she had learned that heaven still listens, even during moments of pain. The church became completely silent as Grace shared her story. Finally, she looked upward and softly spoke. The words that touched everyone's heart. One sincere prayer can change everything. The audience erupted emotionally while Grace stood peacefully with tears of gratitude shining in her eyes. And from that day forward, her story became a testimony of faith, hope, and miracles for countless people.
Before you go, please smash the like button, share this video with your friends, and subscribe.